In question 13 we're given 5 statements regarding the movement of molecules. So we're asked which one of the following movements will be severely and immediately disrupted if the oxygen concentration in the blood gets very low. So we're looking for a movement of particles, an example of a movement of particles which will be severely and immediately disrupted by the oxygen concentration in the blood getting low. So before we have a look at our 6 statements describing movements of molecules, let's think about what kind of movement of molecules would be severely and immediately disrupted by a lack of oxygen. Well, we know that the major classes of movements will be diffusion, the net movement of particles down a concentration gradient, which requires no energy; osmosis, which requires the movement of water molecules down a water potential gradient, which again does not require any energy; and the one movement that does require energy and requires energy generated by aerobic respiration is active transport. Active transport requires ATP, which is produced in aerobic respiration involving oxygen. So what it does is it moves molecules against the concentration gradient, and therefore it needs the energy. So a lack of oxygen will lead to ATP not being generated and being used up very quickly, and that means that active transport can no longer go on soon after the oxygen concentration in the blood gets very low. So nothing else appears to be so closely intimated to oxygen concentration such that there will be a severe and immediate disruption to the movement of those molecules as a result of oxygen concentration getting low. Okay, so now that we know we're looking for active transport for the reasons we've given, let's have a look at our 6 movements. So let's start with statement A, which is that carbon dioxide from the blood into the alveoli will be severely and immediately disrupted if blood oxygen gets very low. Well, we should immediately recognise that this would be a process of diffusion rather than active transport, and though a case could be made that perhaps because of decreased aerobic respiration there would be less carbon dioxide being produced and therefore getting into the blood and therefore from the blood into the alveoli, that is an argument one could make, and there likely would eventually be a decrease in carbon dioxide flow. It would not be severe and immediate, so much so that this answer would take precedent over a case of active transport in which the process would immediately stop once the ATP stock is depleted, which is very quickly. So we can move on to B, which is glucose from the lumen of the intestine moving into the villi. Now we should recognise this as a process of active transport. Active transport transports glucose from the gut into the villi, into the intestinal cells lining the lumen of the intestine. So this is the answer we're looking for. This process requires energy, which comes from ATP, used in a sodium-potassium pump to generate the concentration gradient for a glucose and sodium co-transporter, which moves sodium and glucose into the villi at the same time. Now this is not detail that you need to know. All you need to know is that glucose from the intestine into the villi is a process mediated by active transport which requires energy. Moving on to C, oxygen from the alveoli into the blood. So would that be reduced if oxygen concentration in the blood got very low? Well no, since we have a decreased oxygen concentration in the blood, so there would be a steeper concentration gradient between the alveoli, from which receive oxygen from the outside air, going into the blood where there is depleted oxygen. So this steep concentration gradient would lead to more, not less, flow of oxygen into the blood. Moving on to D, urea from the blood plasma into the nephron. Well, we should know that everything short of proteins within the bloodstream get moved into the nephron via the glomerulus through a process of ultrafiltration, which is mediated by high blood pressure and also steep concentration gradients. So ultrafiltration does not require any energy short of that generated by higher blood pressures. So we can say that this isn't what we're looking for. It has no impact. Well, the oxygen concentration in the blood has no immediate impact. Moving on to E, water from blood plasma into muscle cells. Now I'm not even sure that this is a process which happens in the human body in terms of net movement of water into muscle cells, but if it did, it would be a case of simple diffusion, which is not what we're looking for. And finally, water from blood plasma into the nephron. Well, much like urea, water gets into the nephron via ultrafiltration, and then a certain proportion is reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, into the blood plasma. So we can say that the only answer we're looking for, which would be severely and immediately disrupted by oxygen concentration falling, is option B. So we can say our answer is B.